On the platform and regulars as clockwork, the phone went, and Chris Hipkins, the leader of the Labour Party, has rung in and joined us. Chris, good morning. Welcome to the platform. Nice to have you back.
Good morning, Sean.
All right, big speech over the weekend, and I guess a speech, I got the feeling, part of a process of rebuilding. You guys have been away. You had the retreat, was it last weekend? You take a good hard look at yourself, say, okay, let's get back in the game. And it seemed to me that you're opening the possibility to revisit some policy areas.
Absolutely. I mean, when you lose an election, you've got to look critically at all of your policy positions. So that involves looking back over the last 6 years that we did have the privilege of being government and saying, okay, well, you know, what are the things that we're really happy with, that we did, that we're really proud of? Are there things that we would do differently if we were given the chance to do them over? And what can we learn from that? And what might we want to do differently next time around?
All right. Well, the emphasis media coverage of your speech has been on the tax component. Firstly, is that a fair emphasis? Would you agree this is one of the biggest issues policy-wise that you need to address or get right for next time?
So it was about, my overall speech was about 12 pages long, and I think it was a bit about tax was about 4 paragraphs at the end. But of course, that is the bit that everybody obsesses about at the moment. I get that. And it is an important debate because, the tax system that we've got at the moment does place a huge burden or a huge reliance on PAYE or pay-as-you-go tax, which as we have more, smaller and smaller proportion of the workforce earning PAYE, that's going to create some challenges for us as a country in the future. And we don't have the diversity of, different forms of tax revenue like a capital gains tax that they have in, say, Australia or the US or the UK. And so we have to look at that. Even the IMF is saying, look, and has been saying for some time, to be fair, that New Zealand needs to look at its tax system. But overall, I guess the point that I was making in my speech yesterday is that you can't isolate out the debate on tax and say, let's just talk solely about the tax system, because all of those things, the debate about tax connects to a whole lot of other things, including the debate about incomes overall. How do we actually make ourselves a wealthier country where people are earning more money in the first place? I think if we think that, taxes, either increasing or decreasing taxes, is the only way to change someone's lot in life, then I think we're getting ourselves into a bit of difficulty because actually, taxes are the way we collect money to do other things people want, like fund public services, but it's not the be-all and end-all. Taxes are just one of many, many debates.
Levers that you can pull, that's right. Well, I guess the incumbent government, the coalition, is under some pressure to deliver its election promise of tax cuts. But equally, it keeps on telling us how terrible you blokes were last time in and the terrible fiscal holes you've left. They almost seem to be creating an excuse not to deliver tax cuts. What should be done?
Well, there's no question. These guys are making a lot of excuses for the fact that I think they're going to break a lot of the promises that they campaigned on. I mean, ultimately, it does come down to priorities. This issue of fiscal holes. So a fiscal hole is where you funded something and then, the funding runs out after a period of time. And so 2 examples of that, we did food in schools or, healthy lunches in schools and the apprenticeship subsidies that we put in place. We put both of those in place as COVID response measures to help the economy through COVID and to help families through COVID.
So you were never going to keep on funding the school lunches yourselves?
Well, no, the funding was time limited initially, and actually those programs have both been so successful that we went into the last election campaign saying, actually, these have been really successful, we'll continue them, and we indicated how we were going to pay for that. Interestingly, the National Party also went into the last campaign saying, hey, we think these programs have been good, and we're going to continue funding them as well. So it's not like the fact that the funding wasn't ongoing was something that they've suddenly discovered. They knew this well before the election, and they had it in their policy. To put that into context, both of those policies could be funded a couple of times over for less than the price of the reintroduction of interest deductibility for landlords, i.e. the tax cut.
Well, some would say landlords' capital investment being treated the same in tax as any other business. It was just a restoration of fairness in our tax system where everyone's treated the same.
But, I could argue that case with you as well. But the issue here is, what I'm saying is, claiming that it's a fiscal hole and that there's no money to pay for it doesn't wash when you found money to pay for something else that costs 2 or 3 times as much. And the reality here is, it's all about choices. If they're going to not fund those things, it's because they've made the choices not to fund those things and to fund different things instead.
All right. I want to come back to tax, and I appreciate that you say that, of course, and we see a speech like that through the lens of the mainstream media. So, of course, maybe the emphasis is wrong, and that sends us off down rabbit holes. But when it comes to our taxation system, much debate during the campaign about capital gains tax and your steadfast refusal to entertain it. We had the working group when Labor got in, 7 years ago, that looked at capital gains tax. There have been about 3 of them in the last 25 years. I wonder, do you need to have on taxation or any policy by the next election an actual policy, rather than making an announcement about thinking about announcements, if you like?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the process that I kicked off yesterday was one where we were saying, look, this debate's been kicking around for a long time. We've looked at it in the past. We'll go into the next campaign with a fully developed policy, one which people know exactly what's in and what's out and what's going to be covered and what's not and where the money's going to go. So if it's a tax switch, bearing in mind this doesn't necessarily need to be about increasing government revenue at this point. It could also be about saying, well, we can change the mix of, how government collects its taxes so that it's a bit fairer and more equitable. We'll have answers to all of those things before we go into the campaign. And I say before we go into the campaign because actually I don't think we should do what the National Party did in the last election, where they released their tax policy about 3 weeks before the election. It was full of holes, but no one really had time to figure out how big the holes in their
released most of their policy
were.
about 3 weeks before the election, to be fair.
That's right.
It is a year to the day since Albert Park, since the visit of Posey Parker and the violence and the chaos that ensued there. You are on record as saying you wish you had been there to march with the counter-protesters. And Shaneel Lal, who was instrumental in whipping that crowd into a frenzy, is now working for the Labor Party at Parliament as an executive assistant and a policy researcher. Are you comfortable to have them there? And do you still stand by your comment that you wish you had been at Albert Park?
I don't think I ever said that, Sean. But I do think that, looking back on that protest, as I reflected at the time, I actually think there were people on both sides of that debate who were trying to express their right to free speech peacefully. And there were a few people who were, on either side, who were aggravating the situation to the point where where it became impossible for people to exercise their right to free speech. And I think that's highly regrettable. We should, in a country like New Zealand, be able to disagree with each other, be able to have debates, including the debate around radical feminism, without
and transgenderism,
throwing things, spitting things, and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think, I said at the time, I thought that was wrong. I thought that, you don't throw things in the exercise of free speech.